conduct this session in English. How's everybody doing?
Amazing.
Amazing. It's great because, I don't know about you, but it's been very hot the last few days, hasn't it? Did you like that? Or too hot for you?
I loved it.
You loved it. Really? Well, I'm actually really happy that it's raining today. Anyway, small talk aside, welcome to IFA and welcome to the innovation stage. This morning we are not going to necessarily talk about innovation per se. So we're not going to be exploring the hottest innovations, but we're going to talk about something else. Trust, right? That's the core of the conversation today. And trust in information, right? So it's really about understanding what misinformation, also known as fake news, can do and the reputational, economic, and societal damage that fake news can do. Some people say that fake news, well, you know, they could be used as a weapon. And if you think that I'm exaggerating, let me share something with you. What if I told you that misinformation is costing the global economy $78 billion annually? That's quite a lot of money, right? So this is a serious challenge, and we need to discuss what we can do about that. What are some of the strategies that we as humans, as businesses, as organizations can apply to navigate this confusing world of misinformation? So I would now like to welcome somebody who knows a lot about this, and she's going to be our session moderator. So please join me in welcoming somebody who is a Europe and US trained lawyer and a renowned speaker at the World Economic Forum in Davos, which hopefully you will know. So please put your hands together for Professor Cordula Beckenstock.
Many thanks. A warm welcome to the audience. Thanks for joining us here on the Reuters panel, Navigating Fake News and Their Impact. Now I would like to introduce Stephanie Bernard to you. Stephanie is the personification of this panel's topic. She's the head of Reuters fact-check team, an educated journalist who has worked in many newsrooms around the globe and is super dedicated to her passion, the public access to truth. And what she did is, for example, designing and also teaching digital editors on how to identify fake news and how to handle that. And this journey brought her to where she currently is, on top of Reuters fact-check team. And her current mission is fighting misinformation and enabling the uncoverage of it. And she will give us a little taste of that and warm us up for today's session. And having said that, welcome on stage, Stephanie Bernard. The stage is all yours.
Thank you. Hi everyone, thank you for joining. Sehr guten Morgen, it's great to be back in my first home away from home, and thank you for your time sharing here with me. As just mentioned, I am the head of the fact-check team. A lot of what we do, pretty much all of what we do, is sift through misinformation or fake news. And so the purpose of today is to talk you through a typical day for us. And I understand I'm standing between you and lunch, so bear with me here, we're gonna get there. But ultimately, the success of this next portion is gonna depend on you. We're gonna do a rapid fire on if you think something is real or AI, just to see where we stand. And then I'm gonna talk through some signs that you can use or see to help you get an instinct for, is something AI generated or could it be genuine? So, let's take a guess. Is this real or AI? Who thinks it's AI?
No.
Okay. This is real. These are examples examples of AI-generated mugshots. None of these are true. These are part of the many that we have seen come across our desk. Real or AI? This image.
AI.
Got an all-star here. AI? Hopefully you're getting a better instinct as to why you think this is AI. This is indeed AI. This is a still from a video that we'll see shortly.
I will tell you why.
Yes.
The distance between the zebra crossing is not even.
Yes, so one of the signals here would be the zebra stripes are not accurate there. Real or AI? Hopefully this one's a little bit more obvious. Who thinks it's AI?
AI.
Very good. Correct, AI. So we have a gut instinct as to what is AI, right? But the goal of this, if you walk away from anything today, is to articulate why you think it is AI. So if you have a colleague or you're at home and you're explaining, having this conversation, this would be part of that. So let's start with the background. So oftentimes when it comes to a central character, your eyes are drawn to that person, and this is more of a crowd, but it's really important for me, my first go-to is to look at the background and look at the text. Is the text indecipherable? If it is indecipherable, that's a sign that it is AI, something that looks like, almost like hieroglyphics. Next is blurry or unclear faces. We have a lot of this. If there's a close-up and it's very smooth skin, we see a lot of this with AI-generated images of the Pope, for example. That would be one. Next up, check the proportions. Do the hands, toes, and limbs, do they look strange? Are they a bit out of order? And one of the classic ones, if you've been following this at all, is to identify a sixth finger or a little bit mangled fingers. Secondly, or one of the many tips we have is thin lips, teeth or ears that are a bit warped. Now, this is no disrespect to anyone with thin lips. Please don't run around saying, oh, I think that's AI because someone has thin lips. We also know that that is a natural part of real humans. But these are some of the examples that you can see that would build a bigger picture. When it comes to videos, look for things that are out of sync. If the voice sounds strange or hollow, monotone is definitely one of the key signs. And then, of course, the low quality and definition around the lips. This image here is obviously also AI generated, and so one of the things to also consider is the context. This is where it's really important to understand the news. So what are the corroborating elements? What is the news around the event, and what is the wider context? There was no reports at all that said former President Trump was manhandled by police. And of course, look at the source. Whether it's news, social media, data, of course the source is highly important. So look if you can find the prompt when it comes to AI. Look at who is the original source, and could there be an agenda for the content? This is one of the telltale signs as well to consider. So now that we're feeling much more confident, rapid fire again. Real or AI?
Real.
Real.
AI. The finger.
AI. AI. What we can see here is definitely a sixth finger.
Never saw it.
Right there. And it's really easy to get drawn to the face. So going back to my point around look at the background, look at the limbs, look at the extremities here. Real or AI?
Real.
Who thinks this is real? Ooh. Who thinks this is AI? All right. This is actually real. This is taken by a Reuters photographer. And this was something, and if you thought it was fake, I also thought it was fake. It just gave me initial signals. But looking more closely, you can see clear signs in French about the exact location. You could look at Google Maps to see if that matches the location, for example. Real or AI? Who thinks this is real? Who thinks it's AI? It's real. So this was this was the latest one I believe we had last week. It went around with the suggestion that the crowds were Gen AI to make it appear larger at a Kamala Harris rally in Detroit. And so the reason I'm showing you these real examples is because we're entering an era that is in which we are questioning everything. Back in 2016, 2017, I'm assuming we're all critical thinkers here, ultimately we would think, is this true? Is this false? Is that genuine? Is it misinformation? But now we're in an era where we think everything's false, and this is leading to more confusion around having a shared truth, which is so important for having a shared reality, and by extension is absolutely crucial for a functioning democracy. And so I'm putting a question mark here around transparency because it's very important. AI, people kind of panic around it. AI can be really great. It has so many great things to offer. I think the important thing is to be transparent. So here, this is Xochitl in Mexico. For me, it was really interesting because she was one of the first politicians to say that she was using an AI version of herself as a spokesperson. So she was being transparent about that. This one, before President Joe Biden stepped aside, this was a GOP advert, but it was transparent about it being Gen AI created. One of the hardest things when it comes to Gen AI are audio deepfakes.
You go to the hospital, you have a broken arm. You come out and you're a drug addict with this crap.
So this quote here, you go to the hospital, you have a broken arm, you come out and you're a drug addict with this crap. I'm not going to put this to you because it's a trick question. It actually is a quote that he said, but that is not his actual voice. That is an audio deepfake. And so with audio deepfakes, it's incredibly difficult to verify because you don't have those signals that we were talking about with limbs, with the mouth, is it in sync, etc. There are no visual elements involved. It's also a new frontier in the sense that there is no bulletproof technology, and anyone who tells you otherwise is lying through their teeth. There's not one single tool, and we were looking at them every week at new tools. There's a lot of promising things, but there's not one unicorn that can help with this. And then add a crucial factor, which is language. A lot of these tools are becoming stronger and better at spotting English language audio deepfakes, but way behind on smaller languages in the sense of population-wise. Another reason audio deepfake is really a tricky issue is because we have now people using it as a get-out-of-jail-free card. It's more or less a phrase of saying, oh, well, I didn't say that. That was an AI version of me. That's an audio deepfake. And this AI excuse can be used for an actual real leak of audio that is out there that could be in the public interest. But what we can check is background noise, awkward pauses, higher frequency, less depth in the voice. So for example, just listening to me now, one of the things I can tell with audio deepfakes is tricky, but you hear me now, I'm animated, I'm getting excited at certain points, and my inflection is much lower. Now if I was AI, I would be talking like this, and I would be very excited. And that's kind of an example of what to look out for. So just a reminder that there is no bulletproof tech. Technology is constantly evolving. And I put this here, this came out several months ago. This may look familiar to many of you from Sora, OpenAI. It's just getting better and better. And if someone in this room speaks Japanese, you would probably quickly tell me that that is Gen AI because none of the words are making sense. But for me, I don't know Japanese. It's supposed to be the streets of Tokyo. And it's just getting smarter and better, and it's always that technology is somewhat one step behind because Sora's out, but now the new tools that are used to detect Gen AI have to catch up and learn about this tool so that it can then alert you about what it could be Gen AI content. And I know the buzzword is about deepfakes and Gen AI, and it's definitely an issue. I don't think this is the year that is the big deepfake election. I think that's going to be the next election in 4 years. I think what we're getting now is kind of an amuse-bouche of what's to come. So it's good to have on your radar, but don't forget that the majority of misinformation that we're seeing across all languages is just general misinformation of images or documents that have been manipulated or altered, or little bits of truth that have been manipulated to suggest something entirely false. So, what can be done? I like to leave you with some hope. I'm not trying to be all doom and gloom. It's good to have a gut check, but some things that can be done is to identify tools that can act as signals. You'll notice I use a lot of signals. Again, there is not one tool that does everything. So for example, at Reuters, we're looking at various tools. One that's stronger at detecting audio deepfakes, another that's better at visual deepfakes. Train teams on how humanized instincts can help detect manipulation. Connect with AI platforms for insight. You'd be surprised at how many are really open to feedback and hearing those concerns. And encourage transparency, and this is regardless of what particular sector you're involved in. And I put this here, being cerebral. Misinformation thrives most in times of uncertainty or when emotions are involved. So it's really important to, if you can, step aside and try to think, okay, what is the rational explanation for this? And stay anchored to verification principles, seek the primary source, and consider what are the corroborating elements. Going back to that point I made about what is the context here. So I leave that with you to think about. Thank you for your time helping me go through these AI. It's only as good as you help contribute to it, so I really appreciate your feedback. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. I followed from behind the curtain, and I'm still blown. Super cool. And what came to my mind, I was working as a chief compliance officer leading internal investigations, and you kind of develop an instinct whether something is fishy or something else behind. Do you feel you have the same? Are you getting better to catch it?
Yes, that's a really good question. We always do what we call a sniff test. So, is it a bit stinky? That's something, if you're following the news and you're very into truth, you refine. But it is a muscle that continually needs flexing, needs training. So I think definitely we have that, but it's one that we have to stay on top of the evolution of technology so that we don't get tripped up and caught out.
Thank you so much. And having listened to you, I see the chairs are there. Before I ask the two remaining panelists on stage, I would also like the audience to feel like panelists. Afterwards, we'll have a Q&A, so you came, of course, to meet the experts, and you will have the occasion to ask questions, of course. Now is the time to welcome Ben and Troy. Please be with us on stage. Let me introduce Troy Triangle, sitting a little bit closer to me. Troy is a technology executive driven by innovation and growth. And what he is combining throughout his career is computer science and his passion for being close to customers and gaining really deep insights into markets. Currently, he holds the position of Chief Product Officer at NIQ/GfK. And I believe you also trust on correct and reliable data analysis and delivery, and that's the core of your product. So very great to have you here and completing this round. A warm applause. And then to the far left from me, we have Ben de Peer. Ben is an independent filmmaker, and he founded his own company to create revelatory, extraordinary, and memorable television. This brought him the nomination for an Oscar, which is super, and I think it's only the continuation of him being award-winning editor for newsrooms. And he created formats in very unconventional ways and covered also, for example, Cambridge Analytica and the war in Syria. Fake news, of course, also part of his professional activities and his natural enemies. He has a very clear attitude and also broad experience on that. So thank you for rounding up this group.
Thank you.
Now, I would like to use the occasion, having the three experts with me, to discuss the first question. And that is, what was your first exposure to fake news? And maybe I start again with you, Ben, as I guess you were bombarded with correct and fake news throughout your day.
Well, I grew up in England, when I was growing up in England, it was not dominated by the tabloid newspapers. And there was one tabloid newspaper called the Sunday Sport, which was just full of fake news, like Elvis found on the moon, people still alive in the Titanic, things like that. And there were various degrees of fake news throughout the tabloid newspapers, where there were obviously stories could be made up or put a lot of spin on. But in broadcast news, fake news was a fairly rare phenomenon. But really with the internet and the growth of social media, that became a thing. But the first time we really dealt with it, Channel 4 News, where I was editor, was the rise of Trump, because he weaponized it so that all news was fake news if he didn't like it. And jumping on that bandwagon was every other sort of populist leader, including Boris Johnson, who was the Prime Minister of the UK for about 3 years, but he led the Brexit campaign, and that was a campaign of largely fake news on social media. Some people would argue that was discovered. So in a regulated newsroom with proper journalists, we didn't worry so much about fake news, because we had the tools and the ability to really work out what was real and what was not. But we found ourselves at war with politicians who regarded us as fact checkers and as professional journalists as fake news collectively. And that goes for Putin, Duterte in the Philippines, Trump, Boris Johnson. I'm obviously not trying to besmirch all of them as the same, but the phrase was weaponized as a political weapon so that political leaders wouldn't be held to account by professional journalists. And it really undermined journalism for a long time, and I think it's still a big problem now. In America, the levels of trust in news are somewhere around 50% when they used to be 80 or 90%. And in Britain, there's still trust in mainstream news is at 60 or 70, it goes between 65 and 70%. But it used to be 95 to 100. And of course, that's woken up big news organizations that they can't just take their readers or their viewers for granted. But it's also very, very dangerous because, I haven't worked in a newsroom where there has been a deliberate attempt to give or create fake news. All the newsrooms I've worked in when I started at Reuters, a long time before you did, professional journalists take the news very, very seriously. And so it's really been a political weapon that's undermined journalism.
Interesting you say that. I can confirm. I was yesterday at the open house at Tagesspiegel, and they gave a long speech also on how they regulate and control their newsroom. That was really extraordinary, and I feel it's really journalists really take a big, big effort to protect their reputation and also their professional ethics. And I find it interesting that you say it's really a lever for abuse of power, the whole fake news topic, and bringing it more to the business world. Troy, what is your take on that?
Yeah, so, personally, obviously, fake news started with political things like Ben just mentioned. But from a business perspective, so I work at NIQ, GFK, and we're a data measurement company. So our job is to basically be the unbiased, independent source of data for retailers and manufacturers to transact. Right, so what's selling, what's not, what's the share of X, what's the trend of Y. But those are types of the insights that our company supplies. So from a fake news standpoint, what does happen though in our industry is a lot of people in companies, sometimes on purpose, sometimes by accident, actually send in bad data. There's a lot of fraud that happens in our industry. So, you'll sometimes hear stories about a sales rep got a hold of some, panelists and convinced them to maybe adjust their spending in their tracking mechanisms, or, a retailer accidentally sends data that makes themselves look better versus a competitor. So that happens a lot, and you have to actually create a lot of tools and capabilities behind the scenes to monitor all of that and say, okay, how do you find it? And our fraud detection is pretty intense in our kind of infrastructure, but also just the data scientists. Like we in our company, we have over 600 data scientists that all they do is to kind of go look at the data, try to find abnormalities, try to see like, okay, that data that came in last week, was it real, was it not, and try to decipher it. So we take it very seriously. Obviously we don't technically use the fake news kind of nomenclature in kind of the business world, but we do obviously go back to, you got to trust the data that you're looking at, and we do everything we can to make sure that that's fact.
Yeah, I find the parallel really amazing because it's all about trust that is at stake, plus the toolkit is quite similar. Yeah, like having instinct, having clear rules, how you double check. And yeah, with that, I'd like to move to our next question, namely how to identify fake news. Stephanie, you shared already your presentation, and I had the feeling it's really a chain of tools, like chasing each other. And I mean, where do you start, where do you stop, and how do you say this is worthwhile checking, because you cannot check everything. So how do you filter it and boil it down to that way you drill deep?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's one we get a lot. So essentially we have a wheel that we consider, and the first one is it in the public interest? So for Reuters, the type of fake news that we're going to cover is going to be a little bit different than, I don't know, gossip about C-list celebrities, for example. So we look at, is it in the public interest, and of course, is it harmful? Those are the two big things we look at, and then of course the reach. So what we don't want to do is, because we're constantly in the underbelly monitoring this information, is then write about it without anyone in this room having heard of it. Because what we've unwittingly done is amplify the misinformation. So we also look at, is this something that's in the conversation or about to reach critical mass? And then those are the factors that we would consider before we then take on fake news.
Yeah. Sounds convincing, but still a lot of work. And the next question I have actually to all of you. There's so much at stake. And so what do you find more risky? Misinformation or fake news, and how do they relate to each other? We also had disinformation on the screen, so maybe you can give some categorization. I'm a lawyer, I like that.
I mean, it's hard to differentiate the two. Misinformation is often political. It's the first impression you get. I guess at the moment the biggest example we've got of misinformation is the information war that's going on within Gaza between Israel and those in Gaza. They're not allowing independent journalists in, but there are a lot of journalists on the ground. There are 180 dead journalists in Gaza. Many of them have been deliberately targeted, it's thought. And so I think in Gaza at the moment, that is the biggest example in the world of misinformation, because every time something happens, there are two sides claiming one thing or the other. I mean, there's 40,000 dead, there are 1,000 dead in Israel, which is a terrible thing, but I think that is the prime example of when you don't have journalists on the ground, how a story can become out of control. And I think it becomes deafening to people, because they think, well, what can I believe? That the pictures seem to show one thing, and yet I don't have the facts from those people in Western societies. I guess we rely on television news, and we rely on those reporters that we know that are there. So I'd say it's just as risky, if not more so, than fake news, because fake news can be debunked. So the sort of AI videos that you've seen, that started, I think, with Obama was the first one that was AI, that they did an AI video on. I think those can go viral, but as soon as, when people are watching them, they're normally thinking, was that real, or that did we really say that? And I think when it's debunked, that surprises people, but it probably makes them think more about what information they're taking in. Misinformation is more dangerous in a way, because it means the truth is always contested. So there can be there can be an incident on the ground, for example, the bombing of hospitals in Israel. In Gaza, the Israelis have often been saying, oh, well, this was a rocket that was misfired by Hamas, and the Gazans have been saying, no, the Israelis bombed us. And the argument becomes such that people sort of, well, they say, well, we don't, as a viewer or as a consumer of that news, you kind of move on and think, well, I don't understand, you know, it's not one side or the other, or is it both? So I think they're both awful, they're both depressing for me as a journalist growing up, knowing that if I read one sort of newspaper, it was probably a fake or spun story, and if I read another, it was probably factual. But I would think that misinformation is harder to combat than fake news. But I'll leave it to the expert, Stephanie.
Thank you. Yeah, you say a little bit like the umbrella maybe is misinformation, and the more malicious but still to contest a thing is fake news, because it's malicious but at least it's on the table, and it's probably harder to make it vanish again, but at least you can say, look, this is fake news, and disinformation is so much also context, etc., that it's more blurry.
Yeah.
We go way out of try.
Yeah, so like I mentioned a little bit ago, fake news in the data analytics space is really fraud-based in a lot of cases, right? Is when people just try to manipulate the data to get a different outcome. We actually have a lot of tools that can find that, right? So I think, will they get more advanced, like she was talking about earlier? Yes, but I do think misinformation is actually a bigger risk. And so what that means in our world is maybe people don't have all the data that they need to make a conclusion or draw a conclusion. It's just a subset of it. Like there's a good example, one that actually we had some of the team pull data for. And that example is, you've seen all over papers probably historically that cell phones, the new iPhones, etc., are just going to kill the camera industry. Like it's going to die. What's interesting though is actually look at the data, that's not true, right? Actually phone sales go up in many markets. And there's actually a trend right now where once Taylor Swift has a concert in a market, actual physical cameras actually skyrocket in sales. And it's that kind of stuff where depending on how you look at the actual data set or the components, this is where you can draw some incorrect conclusions. And it's not that people are doing it on purpose, it's just what data set you're looking at the time or what is there. But you just need more, right? You just need more of that data. So again, in our industry, I think misinformation is the bigger challenge. We can actually put tools in place to get fake news or to track the fake news stuff and get that out of there. But it's going to get more complex. And I think, and some of the business questions that now come out are way more complex to answer, and you need more and more data points to get it. And it's gonna be harder and harder for people to actually say what's the fact or what's the actual thing we're making a decision off of.
And Stephanie, you taught classes, etc. So how do you categorize and what do you recommend?
Yeah, so with misinformation, we see it as a general umbrella, whether it's with the intent to harm or without. Academics don't agree on one specific term regarding misinformation. I think that's important to note. But what is also important to note is that there is harm there. And going to your point about reliable data is people need information integrity. And they need this information in order to make informed decisions. So no matter if something was shared as a joke and it manifests into something else because someone adds a narrative, I think the harm is there just as much as fake news, where someone has intentionally propagated something to gain something out of it. Now, whether that could be with a financial incentive, it could be for an incentive on one side of the conflict. We're talking about Gaza and Israel. So I think misinformation is it's all equally harmful, I would say, but it's just the issue is how ubiquitous it is, in the sense that it used to be, media was the gatekeepers for information, and now we're just oversaturated with so many things coming at us that you probably don't even realize subconsciously that you see an image that is misinformation and you haven't had time to verify it, but that image sticks with you. So I think, those would be my thoughts on that.
And that leads me to the next question. It rang a bell when you said informed decision making. In law school, you learn like business judgment rules. Business leaders need facts in order to be able to take informed decisions. And I also went to some seminars at the journalistic school during my law school years, and they told us at least 2 independent sources, always. And I believe it's still like that, I hope. And I have a question now to all of you. What is independent and what is the source, and how to handle that? Stephanie.
Yes, so at Reuters, not to toot our own horn, but we very much pride ourselves on being an independent news source. We are very much crux to what we call the trust principles, which is about impartiality, which is about independence, and that also involves what we consider when we're considering sources. So I think ultimately, just like how it's always been, if you're an independent news agency, is considering where the money's coming from, what is the agenda. So for example, with reports, there's a lot of research, scientific research, but then before we consider taking that on, we're considering writing about it to inform the public of the latest research, or just informing that as misinformation. We have to look at who funded this research. Has it been peer reviewed? All of these questions, so it's ultimately always coming down to the primary source and getting to the crux of that. And so I think, no, I'm a skeptic, I'm also idealist, but I think it's just always to ask, what does someone have to gain from getting this news out there? And I think really applying those questions to ensure, and scrutinize, to ensure independence of the information.
Troy, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, we are an independent source, so it's you call it, NIQ that's what we are, right? So I think the point here is we can only operate in our industry if we truly are. If we end up actually adding any bias into our data sets, or have things that we allow, obviously we don't want to allow to happen, then we kind of we don't have a revenue stream, right? I mean, that's what we are actually paid to do. There's a trust factor, there's a quality factor, there's a brand factor, and it's all, that's what we're all about. And what's interesting in, kind of being an independent source is we got to take this stuff very seriously too. So there's a lot of our clients and people that are clients that get paid bonuses or financially connected to what we report out. There's decisions that are made of which, what retailers will carry what products or get rid of certain products based on our data sets, or there's pricing decisions, what will consumers pay for these things. All of those things are built off of this unbiased kind of data set, and we actually, we don't have that, we just don't exist, which is obviously not what we want. So we take it seriously.
Again, what does someone have to gain from telling you something? How independent are they? What are their motivations? I guess I always watch TV news, and the camera very rarely lied. I remember there were some riots in Britain about 10 years ago, and the then Prince of Wales, Prince Charles's limousine was surrounded by rioters who threw eggs at it. And someone called me up and said, I've got pictures of this attack happening. And I assumed he had been sent them. And I said to him, he was a good friend of mine, he was a cameraman. And I said, do you have 2 independent sources? And he said, yes, my bloody left eye and my bloody right eye. So he'd actually seen it. So in TV news, obviously, the biggest event this century was 9/11, and I remember hearing that it had happened, and people couldn't believe it. And of course, then you saw it on the television, and you couldn't fake. So I suppose I'm making a very obvious point that in television news, you normally see the thing. If it's an investigative story. We did the Cambridge Analytica investigation. We had people inside Cambridge Analytica for about 3 months. And when we came to actually broadcasting it, I was very worried because we didn't have 2 independent sources, because I'm so used to that, having been trained at Reuters. And the lawyer came in and said, you don't need to worry about anything, because the allegations we were making against them, they were engendering fake stories about everything in the world. They were manipulating politics, they were manipulating business. And the lawyer came in and said, your source is the company. Your source is the subject. So we didn't need two independent sources because they'd given it away themselves. But I think what is an independent source is a constant argument in a newsroom. So where have you got this story from? You know, you can't always rely on the police because the police have politics within them. We made a very big mistake on Channel 4 News when we relied on two police officers who identified someone as a terrorist suspect when he wasn't. And so you've really got to be sure, even when you've got two independent sources, are they independent? Because both police officers have spoken to each other. So it's a never-ending source of pain and frustration. If you go into a newsroom and there's an argument going on, it would normally be between an editor and a reporter arguing over whether a source is reliable. So I can't fully answer that question.
Yeah, but thanks for all the input. And what I find interesting is I'm a big fan of avoidance of conflict of interest, also through strong governance. And I think that you all hinted to that you have clear rules and also a good instinct to uncover if people are biased, voluntary or negligently. And as you said, if they just talk to each other, they can also influence each other, but have this mindset of, is there bias? Could there be a conflict of interest? And I guess in newsrooms are corporates establishing rules on corporate good governance on how to, at least to the max, avoid conflicts of interest. And then at least you are maybe still frustrated, but you have done your best. And now I would like to invite the audience. We have, I think, 2 open mics if you have questions, because I had so many already to the experts. Please ask them. Please, the lady in the first row.
How do you see the next 5 years developing regarding news consumption? Will be the main source of news and reliable news still be TV or video? Will there still be newspapers? I think that's an obsolete question, but where do you see it? Where do you see it going? Because now everybody is a reporter. Everybody who can post something on Instagram, everybody who can post something on TikTok can be a reporter, or feels they can be a reporter. So what's your outlook on that?
Yeah, I can weigh in here with my thoughts. I think how news consumption will definitely change, is already changing, is the attention span has gotten so much shorter than ever thought fathomable. And so editorially, we've even looked at changing how we write. So for example, you're probably seeing increasingly news agencies or news outlets that have bullet points at the top. And don't we love that? Because we don't necessarily want to read to the end of the story. With our fact check articles, for example, all our journalists have a duty to put what's fake and true. So list what's fake, but give the true context within the first sentence, because we can't expect a reader to go to the second sentence. We can't expect a reader to look at what pulls up on Google and even click on it. So it has to be immediately clear to context. So I would say this is primarily how news consumption is changing. When it comes to TV, I think video as a format, I think people thought, well, I think it was all the rage like 15, 20 years ago, pivot to video, and then that kind of plummeted a little bit, but I think that's going to continue to grow as well. But I think it's, again, these kind of like bite-sized bits of information that people want as a news source, and then if they choose to really go deep, they might look to an alternative source for that kind of deep dive. So for example, New Yorker might be a prime example of that, magazines, etc.
I'm quite heartened actually recently, because I was very worried about the rise of social media and people getting unregulated news from unverified sources. And but I have 3 teenage kids, and they're all on TikTok and Instagram, mostly on TikTok for news, and they are bombarded with stuff, but they are actually very good at working out what the truth is in a story. And they've now started watching. I still watch TV news because I'm a boring old fart, but when they come and watch the news with me sometimes, they say that's not really true, and why are they balancing the story that way? Because I saw this from an example again, I'm afraid it's Gaza or Sudan, or things that you think that 10 years ago I thought, well, social media would never tackle this because it's a serious subject. But actually people are getting their information from inside Gaza, from people who are the victims of the Israeli assault, or they got it from Israel when Hamas went into Israel. And I think people can tell pretty well when they have trusted people they follow on TikTok or on Instagram, on different platforms. They know who those people are, they know what their biases are, and my kids are much better at understanding the news from that source than I am. And in a sense, they have become their own miniature news gathering operations, because they're watching all this stuff and then they're deciding for themselves what. I still think there's a role in journalism and journalists and broadcast journalism, but I don't think the world is as dangerous, or as, I don't think the world and the truth has been undermined by social media as much as I thought it should be. And in fact, in some ways, there is more reporting of the truth within Gaza from social media than there is from professional journalism.
Yeah, so you say the downsides of social media are also outbalanced by upsides, namely
Yes.
unconventional sources.
Yes.
And probably it's more about like enhancing literacy of people and skepticism and creating their own toolkits how to dig to the truth. Huh?
Yeah.
More questions? Ladies? Oh, sorry. Two ladies first then.
I had a question. How do you keep up with all this new technology in terms of AI, in terms of new platforms, and do you then jump straight onto it if there's something new, or do you wait until it's like kind of approved or others use it? How do you do that?
Great question. For one, there's no shortage. I think a lot of people message me on LinkedIn every other day saying that they have a tool. So there's definitely not, I think the issue is how do you filter through the amounts of tools. So I'm primarily interested in two different things. One is what are the new tools that are becoming more accessible for people to create Gen AI content, and then separately, what are the tools available to detect that? And so when it comes to how do we sift through it, our team is constantly in the underbelly and monitoring certain forums. So we'll see if something crops up, and if that looks interesting and new, we will probably explore that deeper and see if it becomes a pattern, and then that will be a thing. So we're waiting for Sora. When that's widely released and it becomes much more accessible, we'll probably see quite a huge spike in use with that. When it comes to the tools detecting misinformation, how do we sift through that? A lot of patience, a lot of calls, a lot of Zoom calls, some trials, and then so I'll be the first port of call before I pass it to my team, for example. So we'll have the conversation, or we aligned on what the expectations are, then we'll do a trial, and then from there potentially look at taking that tool on longer term.
Okay,
Yeah.
we are already on countdown, so please, your question?
Yes, thank you. I've got a question for anyone of you who could answer it. Like, how do you see the regulatory approaches towards any form of media? For example, TikTok ban or any other type of regulatory approaches when it comes to those, even self-censorship when it comes to media, social media, especially in this whole cloud of having a trust towards someone or against someone.
I would just add one thing to that is regulation is obviously popping up everywhere with these new tools, right? And it's hard to keep track of it all, right? Because especially with Gen AI, you know, there's more. Obviously, Europe has already had their rules. Asia's just recently released many new ones. Like everybody's kind of following suit there, and as they should, but I would say it's not an easy thing. That was kind of where I was going with that last question, which is all about, you know, R&D. Like, what we've seen in our business is the amount of money we've had to move from traditional maybe IT development or platform development to shift to R&D or keeping track of regulations or monitoring data assets, that shift is pretty significant. I mean, it would be a small number multiple years ago, and now it's a big part of our budget, which is just to keep track of those items. So I guess I won't answer the kind of from the I guess the political lens or the other part of it, but I would say from a technical lens, I mean it's a massive shift in dollars, and I think the big companies like Google and Microsoft and all, and you know, OpenAI and Nvidia and all these ones, that's why their stock prices are obviously up like they are, but it's just a huge shift in dollars.
Okay, very quick answer.
Hi, thank you. Just a quick question. I was just wondering if you're still confident that a fight against fake news and misinformation is winnable, or if that is a new front that open up that will never fully be pacified with the marching on of technology and AI.
One quick answer, please.
Misinformation has always been around. We're still here. I think one of the earliest misinformation that we know on record is, for example, in medieval times, there was this story about a tree that creates lamb, right? And so everyone was looking for this tree to get lamb, for example. And now here we are with technology. I think that the key bit is preventative measures. Now, I'm a journalist, I'm not an activist, I'm not a regulator. I think that's an important distinction to make. But what I have seen in my understanding of fake news and how it travels is, I think what's crucial is step one is education on critical thinking, so that we're not just blindly following without questioning the content that's in front of us. And also, I think that if going, it's also touching on the gentleman's question before about regulation, I think it's about having something, it's like almost impossible in the sense of what's the right regulation. And experts will weigh in on that, but I think it's about it being agile enough to keep up with technology. I think legislation is always 10 years behind the latest technology, so I think that having it be agile enough is also incredibly important. But I think we can find a way to cope, but I think it's more about preventative measures and not reactive measures.
It'll evolve.
Thank you very much.
It's always going to be there. It's just the way you tackle it's going to continue to evolve like it has been.
Okay, I would ask you all for one sentence, whatever you would like, recommendation to the audience, your impressions, the feeling with which you walk off the panel. And
my impressions, sorry. What do you want me to say?
I said, please close with one sentence.
Sorry.
Your feeling with which you walk off, your recommendation to the audience.
I mean, just journalism costs money. You know, it's a profession. People thought they could get news for free. You can get it free off the TV and stuff, but subscribe to everything that you value. Don't expect to read the news for free on your Apple bit of the phone. Invest in it. It's a dangerous profession. I work for Reuters, and
one sentence.
Sorry, well, I just said this. My first day at Reuters, there's a book when you walk in of those who've died in the field of Reuters, and it's 100 pages long. So it's worth something.
That was a great appeal. Thank you very much. Troy.
Independent sources are important. Use them.
Stephanie.
I'll give you one sentence. Everyone asked me what journalists can do. I think that's phrasing the question wrong. What are technology companies doing, creating these platforms, going to do about it, and what can be done to regulate it? I don't have the answer on what is the correct regulation, but I think the onus needs to be on companies creating these platforms a lot more.
Thank you. And my sentence, thank you all for joining. Take some inspirations with you and enjoy your lunch break.